GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has slowly been inching up in the polls since announcing his bid in February. Now, the multi-million-dollar millennial is a newcomer in politics, but he hasn't been viewed as a real threat by his other opponents. The anti-woke Crusader has already hit up early voting states, as well as conservative and mainstream media strategy that appears to be working.
According to 538 polling, Ramaswamy enjoys a third-place ranking nationally in the primary field as of Monday, but only 8% of those voters support him. He still lags considerably behind Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. The unconventional candidate announced an equally unconventional fundraising strategy, pledging to give donors 10% of the total amount that they raise for him. I call him the Mary Kay of candidates. It's an MLM.
For sure. He is coming on strong. He's really, I think he's the only candidate that's sort of improving his standing over time. He's getting himself a lot of positive attention. You know, he's been moving upward in the polls. I've always described this as, a two-person race between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And it in a sense, it still is that, although DeSantis' campaign has not gone as well as expected. A lot of reporting on all the problems with that. DeSantis hasn't improved his poll numbers. And in fact, they've fallen a little bit, such that now it was just a one-person race, honestly. It's just Donald Trump. But among all of the people, Ramaswamy is, I think, distinguishing himself by paying close attention and correct attention to what this political moment calls for on the right, for being, very focused on wokeness and ESG. Actually, I think we have a clip of him talking about that subject. Let's play it.
The real problem isn't somebody owning stock in Disney or Nike or any other company. It's the fact that their money is being used to vote for policies in those boardrooms that do not advance those shareholders' best interests. That's really where the ESG problem is biggest, is in shareholder voting for environmental agendas, racial equity audits, climate emissions caps. That's what I've been an opponent of. It's also why I went the further distance of founding Strive. The company I last founded was actually the competitor to BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, offering alternatives to this ESG orthodoxy, voting in corporate America's boardrooms, telling them to go back to focusing on profits and products, not politics and social agendas. And that's how I'm wired. I've written 2 books on this subject, but I'm not just an academic. I believe in acting on my convictions. That's why I started a business, leading business in this area, but even more importantly, why I'm delivering that message now as a presidential candidate. And that's, I think, the kind of leadership we need. People who don't just pontificate about problems, but people who actually step up to solve them. And that's what I've done.
I just don't buy that the main problem with indexing and how investment has become passive and BlackRock and Vanguard have so much control over corporations, projected to be as much as 40% over the next few years. The problem is not that they are pushing environmental and socially conscious governance. The problem with that is they're pushing an agenda that is so disconnected from the average worker in these companies and the average consumer that they're running our economy in a direction that is not beneficial for everyday people. And I think candidates like Ramaswamy have this appeal because they're preaching, more freedom, let Alex Jones back on Twitter because, then we have more free speech. I think it can be easy to get caught up in this idea of freedom, because most people, unfortunately, work for those large corporations that he's very upset shareholders are voting for socially conscious and environmentally conscious things. They work for these corporations. They're forced to work for wages that are so low, and they have to pay prices that are so high from the products these same corporations sell on the consumer side of things that they have no financial freedom. They go to work all day. They do things that their boss tells them to do. They go home. They barely afford groceries. They eat dinner, and then they have to wake up and have another day of work. There's not a lot of freedom there, right? They watch cable news. Not a lot of room to critically analyze what's being said on cable news there. People, I think, want more freedom, and Americans are sick of living paycheck to paycheck, that the idea of freedom sounds nice. That when you hear Ramaswamy say, we need more freedom in this country, more free speech, let Alex Jones back on Twitter, it's like, yeah, I crave more freedom. But let's not confuse Alex Jones' freedom for our own. Let's not confuse this idea that the shareholders that control the corporation voting for socially conscious or environmentally conscious things suddenly makes you as an individual more free. It doesn't. And so it's this false narrative he's selling that's like, I'm going to make us all more free. is he really? He's not saying anything about increasing your wages or having the shareholders vote to share a little bit of the profit with the workers who do all of the labor necessary to make the profit that the shareholders line their pockets with. It's kind of backwards, this way of thinking that he's proposing here.
I mean, what I think he's doing is, I mean, he's running as a Republican. The Republican Party is the party of business and free markets and freedom and all the things you were just describing.
But freedom for who, Robbie?
Freedom for all. Freedom for everybody. However, what I was going to say, however, the Republican Party has been more critical of big businesses lately because it turns out that one way for big businesses to have like successful marketing campaigns is to, gesture at wokeness or equality, LGBT equality, women equality, racial equality in ways that is annoying to conservatives, even though instinctively they want to give private companies, corporations, a lot of leeway, but they feel like these companies are being very hostile to the values of social conservatives, et cetera. So how do you square this circle? How do you maintain an ideology that is about letting these companies do what they want while objecting to what they do with that freedom is what is the place a lot of Republicans have put themselves in. So I see Ramaswamy as trying to walk that middle ground because he obviously does not want to overturn capitalism. He's all about capitalism. He says we need lots more of it. He's focusing his criticism on these couple policies that are not totally freely chosen by corporations, right? They've been ESG is sort of being codified by various governments. And so he's objecting to that. So that's his criticism rather than a criticism of like the capitalist system or businesses per se, which is what you do if you're running as a Republican, because you don't really want to tear down all of those things.
Yeah, I think.
Unlike you, Jessica.
Yeah, I would like the workers to have more of a say than the shareholders in what goes on in a company, because workers have become so disconnected from shareholders thanks to the consolidation of wealth in the country. Most workers don't have the ability to invest like they used to. Once upon a time, when we had a lot of companies going public and they saw this as a good way to kind of democratize the economy to some extent, right? You as a shareholder can buy stock in a company and have some say over what goes on in that company. But then we saw, executives have much higher compensation, having much more control over what happens in the company, essentially being the de facto owners of the company with the bonus structure and the way profit incentives work. And really shareholders with the division of wealth in the country ended up being not the same people as the working class. The working class and people who work at these companies can't afford to hold stock in the companies. So then you have the very clear division of like the shareholders who are the wealthy making decisions about our economy while the rest of us have no choice but to abide by those decisions and work in it. That feels to me like the main struggle with freedom we have in this country. And we can have a free market, but not with the consolidation of wealth that we have and not with good social programs and public goods publicly provided. What is the government for, if not to say, okay, these are the social and cultural values we have. These are the norms we want to abide by. This is the popular opinion. This is the thrust of the direction the market is going. If we allow, the consumers to determine what corporations are doing in some way, if they want to go in the direction of protecting the environment and having some social accountability, I don't think it's for Vivek Ramaswamy to say, this is, tyranny and, they're infringing upon your freedoms and we live in a constitutional republic, not a pure democracy.
If it's corporations doing it, that's fine. I object to, and I'm sure Ramaswamy at least substantially objects to it and then might go farther than me, but in the government forcing this on corporations, I mean, you describe environmental regulations, right, raise the cost of all the consumer goods. They hurt people's jobs. This is why jobs get shipped overseas, because it's too expensive to build anything because of environmental restrictions, and it destroys jobs and it destroys labor is eroded by doing many of those things. So I think Republicans have correctly convinced or shown to many workers that the regulatory, environmental, and energy policies of the Democratic Party vis-a-vis government is actually bad for the financial interests of labor, because there is a conflict between like the elite climate change policy agenda and what is actually good for workers in terms of their jobs and their paycheck.
It is always a decision by the people who run corporations what they pay their workers. They can absolutely afford to pay their workers more. It's not that the U.S. government wants us to transition to renewable energy and that's why suddenly your paycheck is less. That's just not how it works. There are decision makers at these corporations that find it very convenient to blame these things. Transitioning to renewable energy is something that is good for the economy. When you're not having to pay not only the cost of natural disasters thanks to us burning fossil fuels and heating the planet.
If it's good, they'll just do it.
And also, wind turbines paying for themselves after so many years, it's not that if it's good, let's just do it. It's the entrenchment and path dependency of how much power and money people who own fossil fuel companies have.
There's a lot of subsidies for those companies, and I would snap my fingers and get rid of all of them because I don't think the government's role is to pick winners and losers in the market, prop up certain industries, hinder others, regulate others to death, give favorable subsidies here. I just think the government is for self-defense, protection from violence, and I would let the market decide all those things.
And we might burn to death before we get to the point of us finding out if the market will ever resolve climate change on its own.
I don't think it'll come to that, but we'll keep discussing it. Tomorrow on Rising, Jessica and I will actually be interviewing Senator Rand Paul bright and early tomorrow morning. Make sure you catch that.
And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while you're on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, Robbie. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Jessica. Bye, everybody.